Hello fellow RPG makers and welcome to another video. In the previous video I was asked a very interesting question. Why don't I debug the game or debug playtest using database, troops, battle test? The answer is here, it crashes. Now I don't know why it crashes or what is the cause of this file, etc. and it is completely irrelevant to me. The important thing is, sometimes some changes can cause things that the battle test does not like, because battle test requires certain parameters. So, in order to prevent this problem, or having to debug to appease the battle test, I simply use the old-fashioned way. Now, if I launch the game, there are a couple of changes compared to the project. One of them is, as you can see, that the basic attack does poison and weaker damage, and the other is this text at the top. The poison and weaker damage is not a problem, because if I go to attack, you can see I have changed the damage formula, as well as I added the state, poison. Because I don't use this project just for tutorials, I also use it to help others if they have some simple problem and I'm too lazy to load a new project or create a new project, because creating a new project every single time is kind of resource consuming. However, the other thing, the lines at the top, might be more interesting. In fact, there is not just one, but 4 of them. I start my turn for a brief time, I end my action, I start my action, I end my action, and then I end my turn. And these actions, I have defined them inside RPG. Objects, if I go search for end my turn, you can see on all actions end, start my turn, perform action start, and perform action end, as well as the clearing of the log window. Now, this could probably remind you, if you have some experience with Yanfly's Buffs&States core, and these beautiful effects, as well as these beautiful effects. And these are what we will talk about in this video, or what we will try to create. For some of them, for example the regenerate, and these that do not involve any targeting, we will use some game battler methods. For example, here we have on turn end, which happens on turn end of the battler, on battle end, on all actions end, where we ended the turn of the battler. However, for these where a target is involved, using a battler would be kind of inefficient, because if I launch the game, go new game, I cannot obtain the target from the game battler unless I go game troop for here, because here we have already an action. As you can see, there is no target here. The only place where a target is in actions. And now here we have the target itself and the target ID, but not the target itself. The target itself gets generated by .action0.makeTargets. If we call the function, we can see that it created the target of the function. And if you want to know where it is called, if you go to RPG managers, here you have start action, where the targets are defined here. But it can be more useful to use the invoke action inside update action. Invoke action calls depending on the type of action, whether it is counter attack, magic reflection, or anything else like basic attack, casting skill, using items, everything is here. And invoke action, as you can see, calls this ._action.apply. And now this dot underscore action means a specific action. In other words, an action from RPG objects that is defined as game action. So we can search for prototype dot apply, and as you can see, these lines are what constitutes of the base for these initiate, select, confirm, etc. And so we will use them too. If you want to influence damage itself, you probably will not use this function, but as you can see here, var value equals this make damage value. This might be better for influencing the damage because you push the critical tool, so you can play with this. So for the damage, let's copy the make damage value. And now, depending if you want to have some shenanigans or if you just want to influence the end value, you will either alias it or you will paste it and overwrite it. Since I want to just influence the final value with the states, I will simply alias this function. Alias my plugin game action make damage value equals game action prototype dot make damage value. Now let's delete this, and also remember that it is a return function. So var value equals alias blah 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 alias dot call this target critical. And now I want to create a state that if present on the attacker, it will multiply the damage by 1000, and if present at the defender, it will reduce the damage by 500, let's say. In order to obtain the attacker and defender, we need a subject and a target. Subject, if we go to RPG objects and see the apply function, we can see it uses the this.subject, so it uses a function call to obtain the subject. So this.subject dot if this.subject dot is state affected 11, we need to create a new state. So let's create a new state. Change states 11. Let's give it an icon. DB. You can call it however you want. And now we also need to create a skill that assigns this state. So DB assign. Let's give it an icon. We can leave the scope at enemy for demonstration purposes. It is irrelevant anyway. So DB apply. And now we also need to give it to the classes. I have already given it to the classes in my previous recording attempt. I just screwed it up and needed to redo it. So let's save the game and let's check the code. So if this subject is state affected 11, value times equals 1000. If this subject if, since we have target in our parameters, we will simply go target dot parameters is state affected 11 value minus equals 500, and now simply return value. Now if I save it, launch the game, Let's inflate the DB assign state to both beds, and let's speed it up. Both states are in, and as you can see, 4000 damage and 2000 damage. So this is a basic influence of the damage. However, what if you want to do some more things than just this? What if you want to have some multiple states, have different effects? Having if else for all these cases would be kind of bad, it wouldn't it? So once again, node tags come to help. Now, since I have already shown how to create and how to parse a node tag, I will not actually create and parse the node tag. I will only show the functions related to the actual use of the node tag. But let's say that for the DB state, instead of this junk, I want to, similarly to this, have various timed effects. For example, here we have the confirm and react. These names are kind of chaotic, so since they are used to change the damage values, I will simply use at damage attacker node stack and damage defender node stack. Oops. So now let's say I will not give any particular names. So add damage multiply damage add and reduce damage. Let's say it is completely irrelevant since I'm not going to save it. But as you can see, I have some node tags that I will then parse. If you want to have an easier job, you might want to put them in an array and then use json.parse, or you can just parse them like this. But I am not going to do that, but I'll just remember that these two tags, damage attacker and damage defender. So now I'll go back to the code. And now I want first to resolve the attacker's node tag and then the defender's node tag. So var meta equals this dot subject, not meta, var states equals this dot subject dot states. For var I in states, if data states I dot meta dot damage attacker, for var I in data states dot meta dot damage attacker, this dot resolve damage attacker state effect, data states dot meta dot damage attacker I. Game action dot prototype dot damage attacker resolve damage attacker state effect equals function effect. And now I have type 3 effects. Okay, so I could do if blah blah blah. However, if I don't have 3 effects, I may have, for example, 1000 effects. For this case, it might be much better to use switches. I don't mean the game switches, but JavaScript switches, of course. So switch effect case increase damage. And now I code and break case reduce damage, code break case whatever, code break. And now of course we must not forget, if we forget to define an effect, we need to know this. So default throw new error damage attacker state effect plus effect plus is not defined. This code will trigger this beautiful error. Battle test, okay. This beautiful error will get triggered, except it won't have this text, but it will have this text. However, I have forgot something. I want to influence the value, so I need to pass the value as a parameter to this function. So not just the effect, but also the value. So here I would go value equals this.resolve attacker state effect, and one parameter and another parameter, the value. Now the value will get updated depending on the code. Of course, if these codes don't influence the value at all, it will simply return the original value and nothing will happen. Return value. Now for the defender state it will be the same, so I won't be typing it out. Instead I'll return back to the apply function, objects, apply, and take a look back to Yanfly's plugin. Here we have various other states, initiate, select. That happens when action starts. In other words, it happens somewhere here. When damage is applied to the defender, in other words, that would be after execute damage. The select and conclude occur regardless if the action is successfully hit or not. This would be behind this if-else case. The principle is essentially the same, so I won't be showing that. Instead, I'll proceed to something more interesting. Oops, I can close this. I'll proceed to something more interesting, to custom apply effect. Now, you can use, by the way, the node text just like Yanfly. However, these node texts then get evaled, and eval is very slow. That is why I recommend you to use the small node text and then define the function inside the JavaScript files. So anyway, the apply effect will get applied when the state is applied, and if we go to action apply, we can see that it applies item effect, which if we go to skills or items, here are the effects. Afterwards it applies user effect, but I don't know what that is for now. Nevertheless, let's take a look at the effects here. Here we have various effects, and if we add a state, for example, let's add some debilitating state. Apply item user effect, item user effect, apply item effect. Here we have effect at state that calls item effect at state, item effect at state, and you can see that this function either calls at attack state or at normal state. Now at attack state is, if you go to skills, attack, it is the normal attack state and it is irrelevant for us. Item effect at normal state is what is important, and you can see that it adds a state target.addState effect.dataID. Now since target is a battler, we search for addState, and we have this function here that adds the state if it is addable. And now this is important. The add new state as the state, and then the refresh is the battler. However, since some states, for example, may influence graphics, etc., you may not want to alias this, because you then have to refresh it again, but you want to actually copy it and paste it inside the plugin and then overwrite it. So let's paste this, and now the principle is pretty much the same as in the previous case. We have the state ID, so we go this time we don't need to search for the state, but we can immediately go to meta, where meta equals data states state ID dot meta dot apply states or apply effects or whatever. For var I in the meta this dot apply state apply effect apply meta I. And now once again you to go game battler dot prototype dot state apply effect apply equals function effect this dot not this switch effect. Now since it is a battler, we can simply use the this if we want to influence some of the battler's properties. So case, I don't know, case change sprite, he will change the sprite. Now this might be interesting, or you might want to know how to create an actor transformation. So let's say this dot transform butler sprite, and now we need to obtain the argument for that, in other words the file name. However, we haven't it defined here. So that means one thing, the meta I is not a string, in other words the effect, but it is an array where the first parameter is the effect and the other parameter or other parameters are some other optional parameters. This is, by the way, why you should separate the cases for different state apply effects, because here you use something, here you use something else, and so to make it easier to distinguish between the arguments, it is good to separate them by their purpose. So in order to segregate, separate the first argument from the array, we use meta.I.shift. and this will simply pass the array without the first parameter, the first member. So we can use args like in plugin comment. And now we will simply pass here the args0. If we also want to change character sprites, we may have args1 and some other arguments, etc. Now transform battler sprite will need to, if I launch the game and enter the battle, call the actor in the console. It will need to save the battler name somewhere as a variable. Oops. So game battler, by the way, you may want to define a different function for enemies and a different function for actors. If you have, for example, static enemies, they don't have the same properties as the actors. Game troop dot members 0. As you can see, they don't have these names. In fact, they are gathered from the database, so you would go differently for the enemies. So let's redefine this from game battler to game actor. Prototype dot transform battler sprite equals function file name. And now we will go this dot base battler name equals this dot underscore battler name. At least I think it is this way. Yes, battler name. And this dot battler name equals file name. So let's save this. Now let's fix a small typo. I forgot to close the bracket in time. And I have also realized that I have used the shift badly. Shift will remove the first element of the array but will return that. So that means it will return the element of the array and not the array itself. So in fact we need to redo this, delete this, and just pass the meta I. And now we will simply use the args here and switch args0 and args1. I have also forgot that the shift method actually changes the array, and we should not change the array because we want to be able to use it again and again, so using the shift is not a good idea. So after fixing this mistake, let's now playtest it. So let's launch the game, new game, and let's enter the battle. And now, since I don't have any meta defined because I did not create a parser, I will simply define the meta manually. So I need apply states. It is a stupid name, but whatever. Data states 11.meta.apply states. As you can see, I already have it pre-filled in because that's how I found the bad use of shift. So for that I'll use the actor3_5, which, if I take a look at RPG Maker's database, is this beautiful fairy. So let's hit enter. And now meta of the data state contains one member, which is an array of 2, where the first is the effect, and then there are additional arguments if necessary. So now, since we are in the battle, let's add the state. Once again, we won't use the skill for it, but we'll add it through data states, not data states, game actors, actor 1 at state 11. And if I hit enter, as you can see, the battler graphic has changed and nothing crashed, so that is a good news. So let's close this. So let's take a look at how to revert this change. Now if you open the database, you can see that there are multiple conditions: remove at battle end, remove by restriction, remove by damage, remove by walking. Each of these can be customized because, or even removal, auto removal timing on action and turn end. These are all inside the scripts, RPG objects. For example, on turn end, on battle end. Here you have the remove states auto, remove states auto. Basically, where you have remove states, you can customize the removal effects. That is, by the way, how to customize an expire effect instead of removal by spell. However, if you want to have an effect that triggers regardless of how it is removed, which is necessary for this transformation, just like there is add state, there's also remove state. Space. So here we have game battler, prototype, remove state, and the process would be similar to the add state, except you probably won't need to use an array, or maybe you might for some others, for some arguments, but for the restore sprite, you would simply use the restore sprite argument, and then you would do the you would do this dot underscore battler name equals this base battler name. This base battler name equals undefined, to get rid of that, because when you, for example, change the sprite, it is not the same. Or if you want, you can just leave it there. I don't think anything bad happens if you do. Now I could cover the rest of the various timing possibilities you can do to cancel the state, but I think that since you already know where to search for it, game battler for battlers, game actors for explicitly actors, or game enemies for explicitly enemies, or if not there, and it involves both the caster and the target, it is game action. I think covering more of these cases would be essentially a waste of time, especially since we are already above the 30-minute mark. So I'll end it here, and thank you very much for watching and for sticking through this video. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them under the video, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!